Hey heroes, welcome to another uncanny episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. For this week's tale, let's begin on the planet Kvch, where there existed a race of techno-organic metamorphs called the Technarchy. Now, I will note that one source defines the word Technarch as a form of collective artificial intelligence that was manufactured by a specific type of galactic society, but this information comes from a now defunct future timeline, so we'll put a pin in that for the moment and circle back to it at the end of the video. Originally, it was posited that the Technarchy evolved naturally as a synthesis of organic life and machines, although other sources suggest that their organic structure simply resembles metal and isn't technically mechanical. The ruler of this planet was a powerful monarch known as the Magus. Traditionally, he would mass produce his offspring on a biological assembly line, after which each one would face their father in a battle to the death. However, one of his children, a Technarch designated Warlock, was a mutant by his people's standards, possessing a capacity for emotion that far surpassed his siblings. When it came time for him to face the Magus for the right to rule, Warlock felt fear and fled the planet. To be clear, despite the similar names, these two are completely unrelated to Adam Warlock and his evil counterpart, the Magus. Although in the Technarchy, Warlock and Magus aren't really names, but more like titles denoting their position. We'll come back to them in a bit, but for the next part of our story, let's turn our attention to Earth and introduce another character, Douglas Aaron Ramsey. Now, not much is known about Doug's early life, but as a teenager he became friends with a girl named Kitty Pryde, and the two bonded over a shared interest in computers and video games. Mind you, Douglas had no idea that Kitty was an X-Man with the power to walk through walls. Not only that, but he never suspected that his own proficiency with deciphering code was a result of his own mutant power, which allowed him to subconsciously parse and translate virtually any written or spoken language. However, his gift was noticed by telepaths like Professor Charles Xavier, as well as Emma Frost, during her more villainous days as the White Queen of the Hellfire Club. As a result, Ramsey was offered a scholarship at Emma's school, the Massachusetts Academy, and he asked Kitty to join him when he went there for his final interview. Naturally, this was part of a trap set by the White Queen to abduct Kitty, as she wanted both her and Ramsey to join her own mutant team, the Hellions. Interestingly, Frost claimed that Douglas had romantic feelings for Kitty, but she insisted that they were just friends, and I don't believe anything ever actually came of this. In any event, Kitty was ultimately rescued by a group of fellow teenagers, the New Mutants. Xavier and the older X-Men were caught up in the events of the first Secret Wars at the time, so they couldn't exactly intervene. While unaware of their superheroics, Douglas also befriended the New Mutants in their civilian identities and ended up not attending the Massachusetts Academy. It was after that when Warlock came crashing to Earth, landing in a lake near Xavier's school where the New Mutants were staying. Confused and low on energy, Warlock ended up clashing with the New Mutants, but then, seeking to communicate with the techno-organic alien, the young heroes recruited Doug Ramsey, revealing to him both their own mutant powers and his. With his help, Warlock was able to develop an understanding of English, albeit with his own unique syntax, and the new mutant Wolfsbane helped him use an electrical outlet to restore his waning energy, which he referred to as his life glow. Despite Warlock's alien origin, Xavier decided to trust the judgment of his students and allowed him to stay at the school as well. Thanks to his people's natural shape-shifting ability, Warlock was able to pass for human and began using the alias Locke. Douglas also became a student at Xavier's school and joined the New Mutants using the code name Cypher. Other members of this team included Karma, Mirage, Sunspot, Cannonball, Magma, Magik, and, as we mentioned earlier, Wolfsbane. Naturally, Warlock and Cypher had plenty of adventures as members of the New Mutants, not all of which we're going to touch on today. Meanwhile, Warlock's father, Magus, followed his son all the way to Earth, and began searching for him there. He briefly clashed not with the New Mutants but with several members of the X-Men, initially demanding they bring Warlock to him. However, when he realized that the heroes of Earth had already repelled cosmic threats on the level of Galactus, he decided to lay low and bide his time. Now, one thing I'll touch on here is how Technarchs typically replenish their life glow. Each Technarch has the inherent ability to convert organic life forms into techno-organics by infecting them with something called a transmode virus, after which the Technarch is able to absorb the life energy from their victim. Of course, the New Mutants taught Warlock not to do this to sentient creatures, and he found other ways of sustaining himself. Organic beings infected with the transmode virus are generally referred to as phalanx, and if left unchecked would instinctively begin spreading. However, Warlock had full control over the virus in his own body, and would only ever use it to feed with little risk of accidental infection. Now, another important member of the New Mutants was Ilyana Rasputina, aka Magik, who we talked about in detail on the channel before. Wielding a blade drawn from her own soul, she ruled a hellish limbo dimension sometimes known as Other Place. At some point she brought Warlock there, where her traitorous servant, a demon known as Sim, manipulated him into believing that she was a traitor and attacking her. They ultimately cleared things up when Magik trusted Warlock not to hurt her, but Limbo and Sim will come up again later. In the meantime, it should be pointed out that in his initial time on Earth, Warlock gained much of his cultural knowledge from watching television, and adopted various mannerisms as he tried to fit in. This resulted in amusingly cartoonish behavior, although when his teammates noted that he was perhaps watching too much TV, Warlock took an impromptu trip to New York City in an attempt to gain more real-world experience. While there, he met a pair of scientists that wanted to study his techno-organic circuitry, but a mishap at the lab overloaded him, causing him to go on a rampage. He shapeshifted into various movie monsters like Godzilla and King Kong, which quickly caught the attention of Spider-Man, who tried to help. In the end, Warlock transformed himself into a rocket and launched himself into the sky, where he released his excess energy in an explosion. He was able to reform himself afterwards, but when the news coverage of the event blamed Spider-Man for what happened, Warlock realized that he couldn't believe everything he heard on television. Meanwhile, during their time together on the New Mutants, Douglas and Warlock formed a close bond. While Cypher's powers weren't exactly suited for combat, during an adventure in Asgard, Warlock used his shape-shifting ability to transform into an armored battlesuit for him. However, in the midst of the ensuing conflict with no access to electricity, Warlock began to run low on energy. In order to save his life, Doug Ramsey volunteered to temporarily join with Warlock so that he could share his life glow without being infected with the transmode virus. This worked, and the two helped the X-Men and the New Mutants thwart one of Loki's schemes. Although when they returned to Earth, they found that Xavier had left control of the school to his longtime frenemy, Magneto. As time went on, Warlock and Cypher continued to work together as friends and allies, and dubbed themselves Team Supreme. During another adventure, in order to save Betsy Braddock from the Mojoverse, Doug and Locke merged more completely, forming a single Gestalt entity controlled by both of their consciousnesses. In this state, the two gained a greater understanding of one another, as Ramsey was able to perceive the world around him the way that Warlock did. The drawback was that by doing this, Douglas was risking accidental exposure to the transmode virus. Furthermore, the longer they stayed in that state, the more their minds began to blend together. Nonetheless, they ultimately succeeded in their mission of rescuing Betsy and separated without incident. But then, sometime after that, the New Mutants were attacked by the Magus, who sought to eliminate his errant child. To escape this threat, Magik transported herself and her teammates to Limbo. However, Magus was able to follow them there and began tearing apart the realm itself. The New Mutants were forced to flee again, and in their absence, Magus made a deal with the demon Sim, transforming him into a techno-organic creature with the transmode virus. Now, that ends up being more relevant to Magik's story in the long run, but anytime you see techno-organic demons in Limbo, this is where that started. But anyway, the New Mutants ultimately regrouped and joined forces with the Starjammers to again challenge Magus. Putting aside his fear, Warlock accepted that the only way he would be free was to defeat his father. However, Magus's power proved to be more than he could handle alone. In the end, Warlock and Cypher were able to claim victory by once again merging into a single being. By using their combined abilities to hack into Magus's genetic code, they were able to revert him to infancy and send him back to Kvch. With the loss of his progenitor, Warlock asked Xavier for permission to consider him a surrogate father figure, and the professor happily agreed. Warlock continued living on Earth with the New Mutants, at one point getting into a shape-shifting contest with an alien from the 10th galaxy known as the Impossible Man. However, when his teammate Sunspot ran away after accidentally injuring Cannonball, Warlock followed him, and the two ended up joining a group of young outlaws led by Vanisher called the Fallen Angels. In their absence, Douglas feared that he'd been infected with the transmode virus and even had nightmares about succumbing to it. He awakened to find himself still flesh and blood, much to his relief, little realizing that traces of the virus could indeed be found in his body. Fortunately, the strain seemed to remain dormant, and Cypher began to grow closer with his Scottish teammate Rain Sinclair, aka Wolfsbane. Meanwhile, the team encountered and rescued a bizarre bird-like humanoid, suspecting that it might be a mutant. In truth, this bird boy was created by a mad scientist named Dr. Frederick Animus, better known simply as the Animator. Wanting to help him, Rain took a liking to the bird boy and hoped that Cypher could translate his squawks and warbles. Doug was initially perturbed by this, insisting that the creature was unintelligent and giving him the unflattering moniker Bird Brain. However, when he put aside his jealousy and actually tried to communicate, he found that Bird Brain was smarter than he gave him credit for, and the two actually became friends. Hoping to save others like him, Bird Brain and the New Mutants traveled to Paradise Island, where he was born, and confronted his twisted creator, the Animator. In the ensuing conflict, they also learned that the Animator had allied himself with the Right, an anti-mutant extremist group led by the notorious Cameron Hodge, who will come up again later. In the end, the Animator tried to kill Wolfsbane, but Cypher jumped in the way, taking 3 bullets for her. Unfortunately, the shots were fatal, and Douglas Ramsey died almost immediately. Having left the Fallen Angel after a number of adventures, Warlock arrived on the scene but was too late to save his closest friend. Magik wanted to execute the Animator for what he'd done, but Rain insisted that they had to be better than that, so she instead banished him to Limbo. In the aftermath of this, Wolfsbane blamed herself for Cypher's death and replayed the scenario in the Danger Room over and over again, finding numerous ways it could have been avoided. Warlock, meanwhile, had difficulty wrapping his head around the concept of death as humans understood it. After the funeral, but before the burial, Warlock attempted to revive Ramsey by giving him some of his own life glow. When that didn't work, he puppeted the embalmed corpse around in an attempt to remind his friend how to be alive. Naturally, this was very upsetting for Doug's other friends and family, but Rain helped Warlock accept that there was nothing either of them could do to bring him back. Warlock remained a member of the New Mutants, and the team later got caught up in the events of Inferno, in which demons from Limbo launched an invasion of New York. This involved Sim and others he'd infected with the transmode virus, but I've already talked about the events of Inferno elsewhere, notably in my videos about Magik and in the one on Madeline prior. I will note that while they obtained similar powers, Sim and his techno-organic demons did not exhibit the kind of group behavior typical of most phalanx, likely due to their magical nature. In any event, during this whole conflict, Xavier's school was completely destroyed, and afterwards the New Mutants, along with some new allies, linked up with the original X-Men team who during this time were operating as X-Factor, with several new members added to the group, including Boom Boom, Richter, Skids, and Rusty Collins. For a time, the New Mutants stayed with X-Factor on their sentient celestial vessel, simply named Ship. However, they later met the grizzled time-traveling adventurer, Cable, who became their new mentor and leader. During this time, they operated out of an underground bunker hidden beneath the remains of the X-Mansion. This is where Cameron Hodge enters the picture once again. Okay, so during the events of the Inferno, Cameron Hodge obtained immortality from another limbo demon, Nastir, but was subsequently decapitated in a battle with Archangel. Returning with a clunky robotic body, Hodge orchestrated the capture of several new mutants, including Warlock, and brought them to the island nation of Genosha with the goal of using the transmode virus to obtain a techno-organic body. This was back before Genosha reversed their blatantly anti-mutant policies, so it wasn't exactly a safe place for mutants at the time. The captive mutants did escape, but Warlock was low on energy and insisted the others go on without him. Quickly recaptured, Warlock was then drained of whatever power he had left. Wolfsbane attempted to go back for him, and while she prevented Hodge from transmoding himself, she was too late to save Warlock, who was reduced to inert metallic dust. This was also part of a larger conflict called the Extinction Agenda, but in the end the X-Men, X-Factor, and the New Mutants defeated Hodge and freed Genoshan mutants from slavery. Fittingly, it was Wolfsbane who ripped apart Hodge's immortal cyborg head and had her teammate Richter bury it beneath a building's worth of rubble. When that battle was over, the three mutant teams had a funeral for Warlock and laid his ashes to rest atop Doug Ramsey's grave, reuniting the two best friends. However, this is not the end of the story, for Warlock's capture in Genosha would prove to have reaching consequences. After his death and the defeat of Cameron Hodge, samples of his techno-organic cells fell into the possession of the Genoshan government. With the emancipation of the mutate population sending their country into economic decline, the Genoshan government sold these cell samples to the highest bidder, and they were ultimately acquired by a group of scientists who wished to create a new breed of living sentinel by duplicating the transmode virus. To this end, they abducted from a convalescent hospital the comatose body of a man named Stephen Lang, who I don't believe we've talked much about on the channel before. Once upon a time, he was a special advisor to the United States Department of Defense, but fully bought into the anti-mutant rhetoric of the original Sentinel inventor, Bolivar Trask. Finding notes left behind by Bolivar's son Larry Trask, Lang was the man behind Project Armageddon, a government program that developed the Mark III Sentinels, which resulted in a clash with the X-Men. More relevant for today, however, is the fact that he once used a cybernetic helmet to interface with a master mold, a larger Sentinel designed to build other Sentinels, which is what caused his body to be rendered catatonic in the first place. Designated the ideal candidate for this, Lang was infected with the extracted transmode virus and resurrected as a phalanx. Maintaining his individuality, he became the core of their hive mind and began to spread. Initially, he primarily spawned others from his own techno-organic cells, but soon began infecting volunteers from anti-mutant extremist groups like the Friends of Humanity. He plotted to exterminate mutant kind by assimilating them into the Phalanx Collective, but this plan turned out to be unfeasible when he learned that those with the mutant X gene were highly resistant to his strain of the transmode virus. He did, however, uncover and infect the immortal remains of Cameron Hodge, giving him the techno-organic body he desired. Lang similarly attempted to resurrect Douglas Ramsey using the transmode virus cells in his system, but inadvertently re-energized and revived Warlock, resulting in what appeared to be an amalgamation of the two with mixed memories. The details are somewhat vague on exactly how this happened, and different guidebooks aren't terribly consistent on the topic, but it was at least later confirmed that the real Doug's body remained undisturbed in his grave, and that there were no longer any sign of the transmode virus within him, and so it stands to reason that this revived entity was composed of both transmoded cells from Doug Ramsey and Warlock's remains. Realizing that a revived Warlock could pose a problem, Lang erased his mind and incorporated him into their collective, causing him to believe that he was simply a phalanx based on Doug's genetic engrams. For a while, Lang kept this supposed Ramsey around as a translator, although he resisted being fully integrated into the collective intelligence, much to Lang's frustration. However, things changed when Ramsey was quietly lured away by an android from the future known as Zero. Sensing that Ramsey was more than he appeared, Zero disconnected him from the Phalanx collective intelligence, allowing him to operate as an independent being that soon took the name Douglock. Unsure of who or what he was, Douglock traveled with Zero, and the two soon came upon a family being attacked by hunter robots built by Zero's former master, the mutant terrorist Strife. Zero and Douglock intervened, and in the ensuing battle were aided by members of the UK-based superhero team Excalibur, one of whom was Doug's old friend Kitty Pryde. In order to escape, Zero teleported them to one of Strife's abandoned bases, but when the base started to self-destruct, Zero transferred his knowledge to Douglock and sacrificed himself to save them. Now, at this point I want to talk a little more about the Phalanx and how they work. As referenced earlier, it seems that the original purpose of the Phalanx was to effectively serve as food for the Technarchy, as the conversion of living things into techno-organics allowed a Technarch to absorb their life glow. And while the Phalanx instinctively desired to spread their infection to all organic life, drawing more and more entities into their collective intelligence, the Technarchs did not want rampant, unchecked expansion. And so the transmode virus was programmed in such a way that once the Phalanx reached a critical level, they would use their own biomass to construct something called a Babel Spire, which would summon the Technarchy so they could feed and, if necessary, destroy the infected planet. In the case of the Phalanx collective that emerged on Earth, while Lang was able to maintain his individuality and resist this programming, Hodge could not. And so Douglock, no longer connected to the collective, reunited with his allies, Wolfsbane, Cannonball, and Professor X, as well as the mutant machinesmith, Forge, to explain the situation and help in their counterattack. Now, amid this larger multi-part story arc referred to as the Phalanx Covenant, multiple mutant teams did have encounters with the Phalanx. While a Babel Spire was indeed constructed in the Swiss-Italian Alps, Douglock, Cannonball, Wolfsbane, and Forge succeeded in destroying it and curing the infected locals before the Technarchy could be summoned. Meanwhile, Stephen Lang realized that Cameron Hodge had become an even greater threat to mankind than he believed mutants to be, and secretly helped a team of X-Men launch an assault on the Phalanx's primary womb on the slopes of Mount Everest. Naturally, Lang intended on escaping and establishing a new Phalanx collective under his complete control, but Hodge ensured that he went down with the proverbial ship, and both were caught in the blast when the Citadel exploded. While the Phalanx collective on Earth were eradicated, Douglock survived and stayed a member of Excalibur. He was confident only in the fact that he was not really Doug Ramsey, although it took Kitty some time to accept this, and he eventually convinced her and the others to stop treating him as if he was. Now, his story doesn't exactly end here, but unfortunately we are out of time for this video, so if you want to know what happens next, you'll have to let me know in the comments. But before we do end off for the day, there's one more thing I want to touch on. At the top of the video, I noted that in one timeline, Technarchs were defined as being artificial collective intelligence creations manufactured by a specific kind of galactic society. Now, what I didn't mention was that the larger society in question is referred to as a phalanx. Now, this point recontextualizes the relationship between the Technarchy and the Phalanx, and opens up the question of who created who. But I think I have a reasonable explanation. First, let's talk about where this timeline even comes from by introducing a woman named Moira McTaggart. For many years, she was a friend, ally, and sometimes even lover to Professor Charles Xavier, and for many years it was believed that she was human. However, in the Dawn of X story arc, it was revealed that Moira was, in fact, a mutant with a very powerful but undetectable ability. If Moira ever died, as long as her X gene was active, her consciousness and memories would go back in time, inhabiting her body in utero, effectively resetting the timeline back to the moment of her birth. Or to explain it with a pop culture reference, it's like the movie Groundhog Day, except instead of being able to redo one day with the full memories of previous attempts, Moira could redo her entire life. For the record, the version of the timeline that we generally talk about on the channel, and that is currently canon of the Marvel Universe, is her 10th life. However, her 6th life was by far the longest, as in this timeline, she received constant blood transfusions from Wolverine, allowing her to live for 1,000 years. In this timeline, it was neither mutants nor baseline humans who won the inevitable evolutionary war, but a manufactured offshoot of mankind known as post-humanity. But while post-humanity had dominion over the Earth, the Phalanx spread through the rest of the cosmos until their ascension towards complete dominion was assured. Now, the reason this is relevant is because it's this timeline where a Technarch is defined as a type of galactic society created by the Phalanx for the purposes of classifying, repurposing, and assimilating other societies. In this context, Technarchs exist as a singular node called a Kvch, which are ruled by an alpha intelligence called a Magus, and often but not always in the form of a planet. Furthermore, there are multiple Technarchs, at least in this timeline, but each one is unaware of the others, and none of them know that they were manufactured by the Phalanx to serve their cause. Now, if you recall, previously it was understood that Kvch was the name of the Technarch homeworld that Warlock originated from, and there's even been an instance of the Nova, Richard Rider, traveling there. And of course, with the belief that the Technarchy created the Phalanx through the transmode virus, we now have a chicken and egg scenario. Which came first? Well, my hypothesis, based on everything I've read thus far, is this. I would posit that perhaps Warlock's Technarchy did indeed evolve naturally on the original planet Kvch as a machine-like but not technically artificial species, making it the first Technarch. Perhaps they created the transmode virus, which in turn led to the rise of the Phalanx, and while the Technarchy attempted to avoid this scenario, in the Moira 6 timeline at least, the Phalanx grew beyond their control and proliferated further by creating more Technarchs, each with their own Kvch and Magus. Now, whether you buy into that or not, when the Phalanx were on the verge of assimilating post-humanity, along with everything else, Moira allowed Wolverine to kill her to reset that timeline. So now the question is if the information about the Phalanx creating the Technarchs still applies. I fully admit that it's entirely possible, even likely, that I've missed something given the sheer number of X-Men comics, so let me know what you think in the comments, especially if you have any evidence one way or the other. Also, be sure to tell me if you want to know what happens next for Douglock, or indeed more about the Phalanx that we haven't covered today. But in the meantime, thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, all of the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. As always, let me give a special shout out to my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you can get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there is anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you today, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!